Praise the Lord. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunday School. We're in Lesson 12 of our Word of Flame Manual. Today is November 22nd, in case you need the date. And I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the lesson. The title of the lesson is Freeing the Oppressed. Our focus thought this morning says to us, God wants us to help those who are oppressed. Our focus verse can be found in Nehemiah 5 and 11, and it reads, Restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses, also the 100th part of the money and of the corn, the wine, and the oil that ye exact of them. The fullness of our text can be found in the same chapter, Nehemiah 5, verses 1 through 11. They'd read, And there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren the Jews. For there were that said, We our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, We have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. There were also that said, We have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and lo, we bring into bondage our sons and daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought unto bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. Verse 6, And I was very angry when I heard their cry in these words. Then I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, Ye exact usury every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, We after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen, and will ye even sell your brethren, or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace, and found nothing to answer. Also I said, It is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God, because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies? I likewise and my brethren and my servants might exact of them money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this usury. Final verse in verse 11. Restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses, also the 100th part of the money and of the corn, the wine, and the oil that ye exact of them. Again, the lesson this morning is freeing the oppressed. Our culture connection talks about righting the wrongs, or right the wrongs. It would say to us, there is no short list of things in life that make us mad. Long checkout lines, short green lights, we can't find our keys, we can't find our phone, car will not work, husband will not work, traffic is slow, computer is slow, phone locks up, or we get locked out. But those do not begin to touch the real reasons we get angry. Many have been lied on or lied to, ignored, abandoned, neglected, abused, or betrayed. Hearing that last list makes us realize waiting a few extra seconds at a green light because the driver in front of you is not paying attention is not a legitimate reason to be angry. Or even if, maybe you did have to wait a few extra seconds, but maybe the driver in front of you in the car, maybe their child is in the back seat and something just happened that you may not be aware of, but they're trying to handle it, and they themselves are upset that they didn't realize the light changed. So we really have to be mindful of what we allow to anger us and to move us in a place outside of love and outside of grace. But the cultural connection will continue. Injustice has always been a reason for just people to become upset. Our blood pressure should rise when we hear real stories about world hunger, homelessness, oppression, genocide, and infanticide. Injustice should anger us like it angered Nehemiah. When he heard, how the rich were oppressing the poor, even selling them into slavery, he became visibly angry. He demanded justice. The rulers of the people restored what they had stolen from their brothers and sisters. They restored so much more than their property. They restored their dignity and their humanity. And as I was going over this, one thing that came to mind is the fact that often we would say or think to ourselves, we'll see someone in a horrible pit or a horrible state, and we'll be like, I can't believe they did that, or they like, I don't care what happens, I don't care how bad, then you see the Facebook post or whatever, if you're on social media, I don't care how bad life gets, I'm not never, or I will never A, B, and C. Sometimes we have to be mindful of that mindset, especially when we ourselves, we are in a place, some people, you never know what you're going to do until you're found in that position. So some people have just been found in a very desperate decision and or a desperate place, and they have gone to desperate measures to do what to meet whatever ends. And I'm not approving whatever the measures may be, but I'm simply saying that this may be someone's mindset. And sometimes us on the other side, where everything is all fine, cool, and dandy, we would judge those people, not realizing that we're even doing it. Say, I would never do that. I can't believe they did that. I can't believe he, her did A, B, and C, right? Yet, in the midst of all our judging, we're in a place where we can assist them in what it is they're going through and help change their circumstances and change the reasoning why, but we don't want to. So I said all that to say, hopefully it made sense, but I said all that to say, before we open our mouths to say what someone shouldn't do, or not what someone shouldn't do, or open our mouths to say, or judge someone and say, I can't believe they did that, we have to ask ourselves, can I assist them in freeing them from the circumstance that created what they felt they had to make this decision in? Finally, the last few sentences in Culture Connection would read to us, there is a Christian response to injustice. So basically, we have to learn to find our Christian response, because us saying, I would never do that, is not the Christian response. But we have to find a Christian response to injustice. It is not violence against the oppressors. It is love for the oppressed. We cannot be out here saying, Lord, they deserve to die, or they deserve A, B, and C. I hope something happened to them. I hope this, that, and the third. That is not God-like. That is not Christ-like. That is not a Christian response to injustice. I remember, like, the Christian response to injustice would be to pray for the mind of those behind the injustice. So it's not a popular thing, but it's a God thing. You have to pray for the person mind who is maybe the rapist or the murderer or the thief or the shooter, whatever the case may be. You have to pray for that individual's mind, because God can still heal whatever needs to be healed in them, free them from whatever they need to be freed from, and turn the whole situation around. And we have Paul as that example. I imagine a lot of different people were like, he deserves to die. He done assisted in killing all of God's people, this, that, and the third. He ain't no preacher, he ain't no minister, he ain't no this, that, and the third. And I imagine the higher of an impact that God allowed him to make, the more people had to say about what he really deserved. And the case is, maybe he did, but God saw otherwise. So we have to be mindful that we are having a Christian response to injustice, and even those involved in the injustice. Love must be our motive to help us right the wrongs in our world. And with that being said, like, because, love is such a grand word. Love, the definition of love is God. God and our godly love for others, as he has commanded us to love each other as we would love each other as he has loved them. We have to be mindful that is our motive behind everything, not because, we can't go to a situation saying, I want to assist in this because I am about to make sure they get all that they deserve. They are about to, like, if you're, like, say you're a lawyer, right? Something horrible happens. I'm about to make sure they get the most maximum penalty that they can possibly receive. That isn't necessarily, now we're going to want that. We're going to want justice to be served. We're going to want it to be realized that how drastic of a situation has happened, but we shouldn't want the downfall of people. We should want love to be shown. And I know it's talking about physical freedom, but even in this day and time, like, a lot of people need to be freed from a mindset and freed from different things like that causes them to do different things, freed from sin. We have to have a mindset that, okay, justice is served, but also that there is room for love to be shown, if that makes sense. Contemplating the topic will read to us: from childhood we have been taught the golden rule of doing unto others as we would have them do to us. Notice it says, as we would have them do unto us. Basically, how you want someone to treat you is how you are to treat them, not necessarily how they decide to treat you. You don't reflect that back to them, but you show them how you would want to be treated, and that's how you are to be treated. But for those of us who have been raised in the church, this concept seems like a no-brainer. Naturally, we should be honest to others, show them respect, be courteous, share the gospel, and help those in need. Even from a neighborly standpoint, the axiom makes sense. Those calling themselves Christians would not deny responsibility to help those less fortunate. After all, 1 John 3:17 states, but whoso hath this world's good, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? Yet it is easy to get caught up in the busyness of life and neglect reaching out to others. So God may put someone on your mind. Let your brotherly love for them push you to check on to them, push you to reach out to them, push you to make sure that all is well and all is okay with them. Searching the scriptures. Our lesson today is taken from the book of Nehemiah, which was written most likely between 445 and 420 BC. As one of the history books of the Bible, Nehemiah continues the story of Israel's return from the Babylonian captivity and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. The book of Nehemiah opens in the Persian city of Susa in the year 444 BC. Later that year, Nehemiah traveled to Israel, leading the third of 3 returns by the Jewish people following their 70 years of exile in Babylon. Most of the book centers on events in Jerusalem. The narrative concludes around the year 430 BC, and scholars believe that the book was written by Nehemiah shortly thereafter. Nehemiah was a layman, not a priest. Nehemiah was a layman, not a priest like Ezra, nor a prophet like Malachi. He served the Persian king in a secular position before leading a group of Jews to Jerusalem in order to rebuild the city walls. There's a quote here by a man named Norman Geisler that reads, Nehemiah's expertise in the king's court equipped him adequately for the political and physical reconstruction necessary for the remnant to survive. And I personally want to present the question, or present the thought. Look, God has equipped you for a reason. God has equipped you for a reason. We have to find our reason. We have to fulfill our reason. We have to ask ourselves, I have this natural job and I know I need to provide. I know I need money for food, to pay my bills, keep a roof over my head, different things like that. But I believe God is strategic, because you can make money a lot of ways, but I believe God is strategic in which job he allows us to have and which job he doesn't. And I believe that he uses that on both sides of the spectrum, the natural and the spiritual. So we have to ask ourselves, God, what am I learning here in the natural that you want me to apply to the ministry that I'm a part of, that you want me to apply in the spiritual, different things like that. I can personally say that my jobs I noticed the trend a few years ago where I realized that my jobs were equipping me to serve in ministry in various capacities that most people may look beyond because it's not the pulpit. But my jobs, like the jobs God allowed me to have or God allowed me to be in, it equipped me for different things. And I'm like, so now I'm at a place now where it's like, whatever my job may be, what am I learning here that you want me to apply to be a help? And that's a help and an assistance to my local assembly. But that's just a sidebar. Your expertise, like Nehemiah's, will adequately equip you for ministry is the point I really wanted to just stress, as they were saying here. Even though it was written 400 years before Christ, the lesson setting has striking similarities to our modern day current events. The cry of the poor. Nehemiah left the splendor of the Persian palace and led a third migration of Jews back to the Holy Land from Babylonian captivity. He went with the authority of the king to restore the walls of Jerusalem. He stood aghast as he surveyed the destruction of the city. Zerubbabel had led 42,360 Jews back to Jerusalem in 538 BC to rebuild the temple. Ezra followed about 80 years later with another group. And we see that in Ezra 7 and 10. So Ezra 1 through 10 shows the first two, I guess you can say exoduses, so to speak. However, the city was in shambles. So they were free, yet they were not walking in the fullness of their freedom. I believe a few lessons before it talks about, was it Ezra? But it talks about one of the journeys back to Jerusalem and them being allowed to rebuild the temple and different things like that. Now, sometimes when God frees us, okay, I'll use this example. God frees us from sin. We now have the freedom. We're not only free, but we have the ability to walk in said freedom and walk in the newness of life. And with that newness of life comes something. You're going to produce something. If you continue to walk in that freedom, if you're sensitive to God and you walk how God desires you to walk. In this case, they were free, but they weren't doing anything, or they weren't doing what was expected of them with that freedom. So we have to be mindful that even as God frees us from stuff, as God has freed us from sin and different mindsets, whatever the case may be, we have to be mindful that we walk in our freedom and not make our freedom of none effect. Because in this case, with them being freed to rebuild their temple, that was them being free to worship their God in the way that he desired worship from them. But they started, I don't really know what happened. I can't give you the details at the moment. But somewhere along the way, they decided they stopped building, and the city was still in shambles, and there was no progress being made. But once you're free, there should be progress. So we can look at them as an example of what not to do. Rather than what to do. So once you're free, walk in that freedom, do what's expected of you. Don't make your freedom become of none effect. Even though it was, what we're asked the question here, the first question in the book, and of course, as always, like I always say, you are more than welcome to comment down below the video with your answer if you desire. But we're asked the question, what emotions do you feel when you drive through an area that has been neglected and whose structures are falling apart? Honestly, I feel as though I have a numbness to it, and I'm not saying that as a good thing. I'm actually like kind of disappointed in myself as I read the question for the first time the other day. I was like, I really feel like I don't have the response that I should have. I feel like I'm used to it, so it no longer surprises me, or I think about how I personally can gain from it and how I can fix it up, not for the benefit of others, but for the benefit of myself. There have been cases where I'll see something, I'm like, well, if this apartment, say an apartment building is like, for whatever reason, abandoned, condemned, whatever, and it's just sitting there, it's not being knocked down. There are cases where I'm like, well, if it's just gonna sit here, you can like fix this up some way, somehow, and allow this to be a homeless shelter, because we know like the homeless shelters fill up. We know, especially in the winter months, it becomes that much the more difficult on the homeless. But I realize like I feel like I don't have the reaction that I should in the fullness of it. And I need a better reaction. Like, that is my honest response to that question. Our next point says, our first point under the cry of the poor talks about the fact that the children of Israel faced financial hardship. Not only was the city lying in ruins, the people were also suffering. They presented their needs to Nehemiah, for he was also the newly appointed governor. They said to him, for there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. In other words, there was somewhat of a famine. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. And before I move on to the next point, like as I was reading, it like I thought about the fact that the children of Israel, a generation or two before, they received the promise that they were going to live in houses that they didn't build, um, feed off a crop that it, I'm not quoting the scripture verbatim, but feed off a crop that they didn't plant, different things like that, right? And I'm not saying this is what happened, but to compare it to today's time and today's terms, I wanted to bring out the point. There was a promise that there was a promise, right? But all of them, regardless of their state or place in society, I guess you can say, they all had received a promise. We have to be mindful that we go about receiving the promises of God the right way, because, and again, I'm not saying this is what happened, but I wanted to, bring it to today's term and just apply it. Some of the nobles could have said, well, God said A, B, and C. But here's the thing, the people that they were oppressing in the process of them doing, like them having the vineyards, all the different type of stuff, were their brother and their sister. And in our receiving of God's promises, we are to never cross our brother and our sister. If anything, us receiving the promises of God should continue to flow through us and cause our brother and our sister to be blessed. But the promises of God that are upon our life will not oppress the body. It will not oppress the rest of the body. What's the point of growing one part of the body just for the rest of the body, to suffer if we're one big body? But that was just a point I wanted to bring out. Nehemiah became angry. Nehemiah was appalled by how the wealthier Hebrews treated their poor brothers and sisters. The rich were forcing the poor to take out loans and mortgage their homes to provide food for the families. The interest rate, the wealthy were charging compounded the debts, forcing some of the children to be sold into slavery. Such action was contrary to the law of Moses. Deuteronomy 23:19 states, "You shall not charge interest on loans to your brothers, interest on your money, interest on food, interest on anything that is lent for interest," and that is the ESV version. Y'all know I like a side note. So here's my side note. So as I was reading that, I was thinking to myself, it's kind of messed up, right? Because it's almost as if the children of Israel traded places with the heathen and started acting like the heathen. Like God allowed the heathens or the heathen country in Babylon to oppress his people because they weren't doing right. But when it was time for them to walk in their freedom, they were freed in sections, right? And it's like this group of people, they forgot where they came from. They forgot that they were a part of captivity. They were a part of this chastisement that the Israelites had to receive. It's like they forgot that they too, or such were some of them. There we go. They forgot that such were some of them, and was manipulating the situation of those less fortunate than them, those who were just beginning to walk in their freedom, those who were at a excuse all my but at a lower place or at a less fortunate place than what they were at the time. But when you think about it, they themselves, having that time frame, they had time to build themselves up. What should have happened, in my opinion, and I'm not saying this to rewrite history or nothing like that, but how it should have been, because we see here that Nehemiah rebuked them, how it should have been is as the next wave of bondage of captives were set free, those who were already freed should have been an assistance in the newer I don't want to say freebies, but in the newer group growing and becoming established and growing that foundation into what was theirs. And then I wanted to read the scripture, Psalms 24:1. "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein." So again, it's like, how are you going to do the most about something that really doesn't belong to you, that really isn't even of your doing, isn't of your making? Maybe you had a hand in it, or you assisted in it, because they did start to rebuild. They forsook the rebuilding, but they did start. And as if God is the one who has allowed you these things, as if God isn't the one who has, for a temporary time, allowed you dominion over such things. So even as we apply this to ourselves, we have to be mindful that it might have your name on it, it might be in your name, but at the end of the day, is it really yours? And because it's not really yours, who are you to manipulate someone less fortunate than you in the use of it? But the point continues, or rather than continuing, yes, it continues. The condition of the poor and their ill treatment enraged Nehemiah. He wrote, "And I was very angry when I heard their cry and these words. Then I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, Ye exact usury every one of his brother. And I set a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, We after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. And will ye even sell your brethren?" Like I said, it was almost as if they were switching places with the heathen country, and they themselves were becoming heathens, just to be honest. "Or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace and found nothing to answer." Nehemiah 5, verses 6-8. They knew they were wrong. They knew they didn't have a comeback for Nehemiah because they knew they were wrong. They knew what they were doing was not right. Yeah, they were making money. Yeah, they were prospering in the natural, I guess you can say. But just because they were prospering and just because they were successful in doing it doesn't mean that it was right to do. Doesn't mean that it was what God wanted of them. Doesn't mean that God was pleased with it, because clearly if he was pleased with it, he wouldn't have had Nehemiah rebuke them. But yeah, so we have to be mindful that we don't look at success as a measure or as a gauge as to whether or not God is pleased with us, because at the end of the day, God being pleased with us he's going to let you know. Like, he's going to let you know whether or not he's pleased with you, and it has to be him letting you know that, rather than, ooh, I made such and such money today, ooh, so-and-so this, so-and-so that, I have this or that. It can't be those things. It can't be the fact that you're progressing, but in your progression, someone else is bound into poverty, in this case, or whatever, and think that God is pleased with that. God, he's not pleased with that. We're asked the question here, what are some things happening around the world that stir up some strong emotions inside of you? How can you pray about these things? How can you trust God with these things? I'm trying to think. It's not that there isn't one. It's just like a lot of things anger me. And God really has had to deal with my heart in the way I respond to certain things, especially with, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement. But there's a lot of it works on me. But I'm learning and praying about these things, not only praying for, okay, so for the Black Lives Matter movement, right? We're not even movement, just the fact, the reality that we live in. And praying about these things, I've learned not only to pray for the safety of myself and others, but I've learned to pray for the minds of those who don't get it, the minds who are against it, the minds who are against us, the minds and the heart of those. Because at the end of the day, hate, injustice, prejudice, all these things, it's a sin problem, and it's a matter of sin being in the heart and this Adamic nature that we're all born with. And to be honest, like, that is what needs to be addressed. And until that is addressed, there is a lot of things that we're just going to continue to fight with. But it's like we have to choose. I'm learning to choose my battles. I'm learning to choose my battles and understand what has impact. So I change my prayers up. The rest of the questions: how can you trust God with the things? God knows what he allows. God knows why he allows it. And God knows how to stop something or allow something to continue. So, and then I know that God makes no mistakes. I know he does all things well. I know that he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He knows all the details of the in-between. I like to say that he knows any alternate routes that we could take. He's omniscient. He's all-knowing. So with him being all-knowing, I know that if he has allowed something, there is a reason. If he's allowed something it is in his will some way or somehow, or if it's more so his permissive will than his perfect will, I understand that he's going to use it some way, somehow, to get glory out of it. But yeah, hopefully that answered the question. C reads that injustice should anger us. The plight of the poor should move us to have compassion. Many church organizations have nonprofit groups whose mission is to care for those in need. For example, the United Pentecostal Church International has compassion services. Sorry, that confused me. Has Compassion Services International, which provides a means for assisting those suffering from natural disaster. The CSI website states, Compassion Services International exists to offer help and hope to people living in desperate situations around the world. CSI receives an overwhelming number of requests for help from around the world each year. We want to be the hands and the feet of Christ while providing the physical and spiritual needs of those who are suffering. CSI does this by offering disaster relief, medical missions, humanitarian aid, and more around the world. These endeavors not only help to meet the immediate physical needs of those we serve, but it also opens the door for the love of Jesus to be displayed and for the gospel to be shared. In 2019, CSI was instrumental in providing emergency food and clothing to victims of the severe flooding in Malawi and Mozambique. 200,000 people were displaced because of the flooding in Malawi. 10 United Pentecostal churches were destroyed and needed to be rebuilt. The flooding washed away the homes and all the worldly goods of at least 20 UPC of Malawi pastors. So it washed away the homes of at least 20 pastors within the organization. CSI assisted during these hardships. However, coping with natural disasters is one thing. When the plight of the poor is compounded by corruption and greed of those in authority, our sense of injustice should provoke us to action. Consider the global scourge of human trafficking. Human trafficking, believed to be the third largest criminal activity in the world, includes forced labor, domestic servitude, and commercial sex trafficking. People are being bought, sold, and smuggled like modern-day slaves, often beaten, starved, and forced to work as prostitutes or to take jobs as migrant, domestic, restaurant, or factory workers with little or no pay. It is a heinous crime. Hopefully, I think I pronounced that. It is a heinous crime which exploits the most vulnerable in society. Here, we're asked the question. Well, before I ask the question, so we're given the example of a organization within the UPC organization. But that isn't the only thing it's used here for an example. It doesn't have to be a big organization that embodies the Christian response to the different things that are going on. It doesn't have to be the organization as a whole. I'm aware of different organizations that respond, different organizations that have different things. I'm aware of other organizations within the UPC that responds to different things, like maybe not natural disasters, but other issues that arise. And then I'm aware of churches that have different things in place to be an assistance to others and to help in different things that may happen or go on. I'm aware of even like different saints who, of course, I imagine they talk with their pastor and different things like that, and they have the permission to do so, but who they themselves, they live their lives in such a way that if someone needs help, they're in a position, in a place where they can be that help. If someone needs assistance or if something happens, they live their lives in such a way where they may have an overflow, and just because they have the overflow, it doesn't mean that they spend the overflow, or it doesn't mean that they, you know how like just because you have it doesn't mean you have to flaunt it, or just because you have it doesn't mean you have to spend it. They have that type of mindset because they understand that when they do have money, if God allows someone to cross their path, or not, it doesn't even have to be money. It could just be time, different things like that. They can be of an assistance. They can be of a help. So there are a bunch of different things, a bunch of different ways that we can assist and provide that Christian response in different things happening, whether it's a natural disaster, whether someone needs food. Maybe we don't think about it, but maybe someone needs daycare excuse me, maybe someone needs daycare. Maybe there's like a single parent or something like that that's trying to work, different things going on. And they're just struggling with daycare and they can't find a daycare, this, that, and the third. There are so many ways to be a help to the body of Christ, but we just have to have the heart and be willing to make the sacrifice to do so. Again, we're asked the question, how should Christians respond to human trafficking? I would say with prayer. It is, I would say first and foremost with prayer, there are certain things that we have to realize we're not superheroes type of thing. So like, I wouldn't suggest, you walking up to somebody and, trying to get in a physical fight with them. Different things. There's certain things I wouldn't suggest while in certain situations that can happen, that can lead to a good thing. But I would say walk in wisdom is the point I'm trying to make. Do things in wisdom, and in whatever way that you can be a help, be that help. So you may not be like the person that's going to busting up at someone's home, busting up and you may not be that person, excuse my vernacular, but you may not be that person that goes into the home and you're like, no, we're not doing this, and you wrestle the individual to the ground. And the thing is, that's not always safe, because it could end at they, unfortunately, they overpower you, and then now you're also, in the situation. But first and foremost with prayer, be led by the Spirit. If God, sometimes, okay, I'll use this example. Sometimes the little things that we don't think that mean anything, or it's like, that's just a random thought. It really is God impressing something on your spirit. Like, God may allow you to see something that looks suspicious, or whatever the case may be, or allows you to see whatever. I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of a specific, and it's not coming to me right now. So I'm using whatever, but you allow you to see something in which you can report, and in your reporting, you may be the missing hole to like the investigation, and whatever you saw could be the thing that it fills in the pattern or the gap or the connection that the cops may have been looking for. And in that assistance, it may not have seemed big to you, but in that assisting that you gave, God was able to free, or God was able to reveal what was going on there. But as far as human trafficking, because the fact of the matter is, sometimes nothing looks suspicious and everything looks fine and dandy and everything looks normal, yet it isn't. So again, I stress the importance of being led of the Spirit. Because if God leads you to pray for something, you're like, but they're fine. If God is leading you to pray for somebody, they're not fine, first of all. Sometimes our natural, or our what we believe to be our natural wisdom will conflict the wisdom of God and His leading in the Spirit. But we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't act as if God isn't God. So be led of the Spirit. Forgive me for my really long answer, but yeah, be led of the Spirit. Be prayerful. If God leads you to do something, do it, whatever it is that He's leading you to do. And that's not even just in the case of human trafficking, but in general, there could be someone where there's abuse in the home, or the child, or different things like that. It could be someone is walking and going and showing up as if everything is okay, but the fact of the matter is that they're starving. There's no food in the house. Their utilities are cut off. There could be anything. So in all of these situations, our response has to be to pray and to be led of the Spirit and seek God for instruction, because I'm not the one to tell you what to do in different situations, but definitely seek God for instruction. Seek your leadership and different things like that. The response of the church should first and foremost be prayer. Praying for the victims and praying against the evil influences behind these heinous acts. However, did I just read? No, excuse me. However, we must take action beyond prayer. The church has a responsibility to teach what the Bible says about injustice. Additionally, there is a need for the church to declare how all of humanity has been made in God's image. This includes showing how God views women and children. The church needs to expose the evil influence of pornography. There need to be conversation in Christian men's group teaching men, especially young men, how women ought to be treated. The exploitation of women and the violence they often face at the hands of unrighteous men must come to an end, and the church has a responsibility to herald the cry of God's heart, protecting those who have been objected through lust and greed. Now, I just want to make this point. So it focuses on, basically in the passage, it focuses on the men being the source of the evil thing. But I want to say this: not only should there be Christian men's group teaching men how a woman should be treated, but there should be women's groups teaching young women how a man ought to treat them, because in many cases you find out where, especially like if the father was not in the home growing up, or if they grew up in a toxic environment, a lot of young women, young girls they're growing up and not knowing how they should be treated by a man, or how should they be treated in general. So then you find certain things are being allowed that should not be allowed, that they think is okay and that they mistake for love. So like, I just want to say that we shouldn't focus this solely on the men as if men are demons, because that's not the case. It should be focused on both sides, because I would say that is part of the issue. I won't say we, and I won't say always, but oftentimes when an issue is being addressed, there's looked for what's the word? I can't think of the word. But there's looked for an enemy, or it starts with an A, the word I'm trying to think of. There's looked for the enemy and the person against it, and against like the person that needs to be overcome. Okay, it's looked at from the point of the victor and the victim, but sometimes it's not as black and white as that. Sometimes there is a large gray area where both sides need to be educated beforehand before we get to where whatever is allowed to happen. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that it should be on both sides. Like, don't just focus on the men, but focus on the women, and not solely on how the women are treated. But there are cases where the woman, is the one doing the wrong. So sometimes it's not. Long story short, it's not as black and white as and it's a short passage that they put here, so I understand that. But given the opportunity to say it, I want to bring it up. It's not as black and white as it seems. Both sides need to know how to treat each other. Both sides need to know how to be treated. Both sides need to be educated. And as far as the church is concerned, we have to be mindful that we're not coming at it from one side. Hopefully that all makes sense. Because the thing is, like, it talks about, no, I digress. Okay, we're asked the question, how can our local church address this issue beyond prayer? As I said, have the conversation beyond prayer. Like, if you're in a place where you can be a help and be an assistance, be that help and be that assistance. There are a lot of us that have different jobs that put us in a place or expose us to different ones going through different things, and some have jobs in certain fields like social work, different things like that, or they're educated in social work where they can help and assist in that area. But as far as the local church is concerned, I would say it depends on the abilities of the local church, and not only the ability, but what God gives the local church to do, what God gives the pastor, like how God leads the pastor in doing so. So again, that's not really a black and white question either, but whatever God asks of you, do. If that would be like my short answer for that. The second part of the lesson, it seems that we only have 2 parts today, but it's Nehemiah called for the freedom of the oppressed. As stated above, the vile mistreatment of the poor Hebrews enraged Nehemiah. He said, Then I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, Ye exact usury every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, We after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen, and will ye even sell your brethren, or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace, and found nothing to answer. Also I said, It is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God, because of the reproach of the heathen our enemies? I likewise, and my brethren and my servants might exact of them the money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this usury. Restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, their houses, also the 100th part of the money and of the corn, the wine, and the oil, that ye exact of them. The rulers reversed the unjust policy, so they were made aware what they were doing wrong, or rather they were called out on what they were doing and the fact that it was wrong. They were convicted and they undid their wrong. They wrote, is that the past tense of right? Their wrong. They made right their wrong, excuse me. Nehemiah's scolding of the wealthy caused them to reverse the unjust policies. They promised to return the lands taken from the poor brethren and not to demand anything more from them. After calling the priests, the wealthy landowners, and the officials together, having them swear to fulfill the promises, Nehemiah shook out his garment. He said, So God shake out every man from his house and from his labor, that performeth not this promise. Even thus be he shaken out and emptied. And all the congregation said, Amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did according to this promise. Notice that it says that they returned everything and they didn't ask of anything more of them. We have to be mindful. And I'm not saying that, prayerfully we're not causing someone's oppression. But, since I'm talking to y'all, keep it with us. We have to be mindful that we're not like, all right, I'll do this, but I need them to do this one more thing. Or I need them to be this, whatever. Like, we can't, that's not really freeing somebody, and that's not really turning from your ways or being convicted. You're probably just, if that's your mindset behind something, you're probably just doing it because someone called you out, and you feel like, especially if they called you out in front of everybody, now all eyes on you, now they're expecting you to do something, but, like, you have to have the heart. Okay, I wanted to make sure I didn't have it to bring up later. It's like when you do something from somebody, like, how it's like, I don't think it's as popular as it was maybe last year, the year before, but different ones helping out the homeless or different ones doing this, that, and third, and they make a video and doing it or whatever. And I'm not saying this is always the case. I'm not saying that at all. But, like, we have to be mindful that we're not doing what we're doing, helping the oppressed, freeing the oppressed in whatever shape, whatever form that it takes, simply to say that we did it. But that we had the heart to actually do it. It can't be simply because of who's looking, but that heart, there has to be a fruit that's birthed in that changing of our heart and in that turning away from whatever it was. And prayerfully, like, if need be, you can apply this to other things. Like, I can't give you an example right now, but prayerfully you can apply this to other things. And here's my thing. Not only did they give, like, in their giving everything back, they had to come to the realization, and earlier in the lesson I read Psalms 24:1, they had to come to the realization that it wasn't theirs anyway. It was the Lord's. They themselves belong to the Lord. They had to come to the realization that it wasn't theirs to put a tax on or a usury on. Forgive me if it got real quiet. I didn't realize how far away I was from the mic. But it was the Lord. So I imagine, like, coming to that realization, it's like, it had to be a humbling process. It had to be like, you know what, Nehemiah, you're right. You know what, we're wrong. You know what? Because here's the thing. The rebuke could have came a different way. We already know Israel didn't like to listen. And sometimes, got a word from the prophet. Oftentimes they got a word from the prophet and they was like, no, I'm not doing it. I don't want to hear that, this, that, and the third. So they did what they did, and then God had to get on them again. It could have been said that Nehemiah rebuked them or whatever, and they were like, "Nah, fam." And then they themselves got sent back into captivity since they seemed to have forgotten what they were free from. But thankfully, they reversed their unjust policies. In taking action to curtail the abuse of the poor, Nehemiah showed mercy to the oppressed. He recognized their plight and did what he could to relieve their suffering. So it says, in verse, I believe this is either 9 or 10, I likewise and my, no, excuse me. Well, it talks about, it's not right in my immediate view, but one of the scriptures talks about how Nehemiah decided to exact the different things to him, and he decided to fulfill some of these debts and different things like that. And it brings me back to the point where I said sometimes we have the means to change things, we just don't have the desire to. We just don't have we're not letting our, it's not to say that we don't have love, but we're not letting our love show in that way sometimes. So if you have the means to change someone's circumstances, and a lot of the times you're not going to lose anything in doing so. It's not going to cost you anything. You have the overflow, you have the time, you just don't have the heart. Sometimes we have to be like Nehemiah, and let me read what it actually says. Do what we can to relieve our brothers and our sisters' suffering. The next point says that we must seek to help the oppressed. It says, would to God that a mere scolding could harness the evil in our land, and that the world would be free from oppression. However, the corruption and greed that drives modern slavery and human trafficking, as well as multitudes fleeing poverty and oppression in their homelands, leads us to believe that will not happen. Already, international law prohibits human trafficking, but still many individuals are victimized by these atrocities. What can you do to become an advocate for those who are being oppressed? Well, if you know somebody, or if you know of, well, one, you can just open your mouth and spread. Like, it's not hard to like share a post or to assist and stuff. There are different drives and different funds that may be created or may that be in existence that assist in that. Maybe your simple help can be you donating to the cause, you praying a focused prayer for that cause. Simply like word of mouth goes a long way. Sometimes we know people in situations that they feel like they have to be in the situation, and because the thing is, like, you have to want to be free sometimes, and maybe they feel like they can't, not even want to be free. Maybe they feel like they can't be free from it, like they have to go through it. Sometimes you can simply telling someone it doesn't have to be like this. You don't have to be oppressed in this way. You don't have to experience this abuse. Whatever the case may be, they don't have to do this. Sometimes all we have to do is open our mouth and be a personal advocate to that person that God allows us to experience, or God allows us to cross paths with, and let them know that you can be free. God can free you from this. There is nothing that God cannot free us from. Some people just don't realize that. Some people just don't believe it. But if we could be that personal witness, that personal advocate, that would go a very long way. We're at eternalizing the message. Regardless of our political stance concerning these modern issues or situations, we must remember the words of Jesus in Matthew 25. He stated, "Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? And when saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? And the king shall answer unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. And that's Matthew 25, verses 34 through 40 for reference. Likewise, James stated, if a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding ye give them not these things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? Even so, faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. James 2:15 through 17. So sometimes we have the works to put behind the faith, and my works may not look like your works may not look like my works, but in some way, shape, or form, we all have the ability to make a difference to somebody. We all have the ability to reach somebody. You may not reach the same person that I reach. You may not be called to the same people that God has allowed me to cross, but at the end of the day, we all have the same ability to make a difference in someone's life because God has made a difference in ours and He can work through us. The simple truth is that Christians have a moral obligation to do whatever we can to stop oppression in the world. Over the years, many have seemed fearful of getting involved in the social gospel and prided themselves on their evangelistic zeal. We must never substitute social programs for preaching the gospel. Salvation is the ultimate need of every individual. However, it is easier for people to grasp the gospel when they are not shivering because of the cold and nakedness, or when their stomachs are not growling from hunger. Nehemiah set a high standard that we should seek to follow. Addressing social and political needs must never replace preaching the full plan of salvation. However, becoming involved and doing whatever we can to stop the abuse and corruption will complement our preaching. So again, like, we have a responsibility. We can make a difference in some way. And here's the thing, because it's us making a difference rather than someone else, we all, I feel like I need to be a little bit more specific. Okay, right, because it's us making a difference, us who are filled, us who have the Holy Ghost, rather than maybe another organization, whatever the case may be. And it could be that you yourself make yourself a part of the organization, so you volunteer with that organization. But not only do they get that natural help, but they get that spiritual witness. So now not only are they being freed from their circumstances, or however oppression has made itself known in their life, now you yourself, I myself, also have the ability to tell them God can also free you from sin. God can also save your soul. God can also free you from damnation. So in our freeing of the oppressed, there's levels to it. And we contrary to what some may believe, we have a responsibility to do so. The last sidebar I have is this. Sometimes we ourselves, we get like the the richer in Israel, the ones who had already been freed beforehand and had already turned from exile beforehand, and we get in a comfortable place, and we don't want to lose that comfort. We don't want to lose what we had lost before. But we can't be so tight and have such a grip on that worldly or that natural comfort that we don't have a heart to help someone else be comforted, help someone else be free. Like, they forgot that such were some of them. They forgot where they had came from. We can't forget where it is that we have came from. If anything, if we know what it's like to experience a certain thing, that should give us that much the more to want to be an assistance or want to be a help in someone else coming out of it. Like, if we come out of something, we know the weight of it. We know how it feels. We know the difficulties behind it. So we should want and desire not only myself to come out of it, but we should want other people to come out of it as well, because we understand that if we didn't want to be in it, and if we didn't want to go through it, they surely don't want to be in it, and they surely don't want to go through it. So with having that mindset, we see the love of God shed abroad through us. We see that desire to want to be that help in whatever shape, form, however God leads you to do so, allows you to do so, whatever impact it is that you make. You can be that assistance, and don't be that natural assistance without also being that spiritual witness, because that's what makes the difference between you and maybe an unsaved person, because you can present them the fullness of freedom where someone